Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout, where today we're going to be taking a look at the assault rifle in Fallout and going over its complete history. So the assault rifle first showed up in Fallout 1, and it kind of starts out as a weird point. In-game, the assault rifle is going to be about a mid-game weapon that you're going to be finding. This one, it uses the 5mm round, and this is where a lot of the confusion kind of comes from, because the 5mm round originated in the very first Fallout. What that round actually is, we're not entirely certain because it's never really said, and it's kind of just a round that you see show up throughout multiple Fallout games, where sometimes it goes to like the minigun, and sometimes it goes to the assault rifle, sometimes it goes to some other guns. It's a little bit strange. For overall stats, though, the assault rifle started out doing 8 to 16 damage and could be fired either in semi-auto or in burst fire. And burst fire is where it excelled. It did the best with that, and you could actually do pretty good DPS. If you're going to use this in semi-auto, there wasn't really that much of a reason to use it, since you could already get like the hunting rifle well before this that does higher minimum damage, or the same minimum damage and higher maximum damage, and uses the 223 round, which was more common in the early game. Now, as to what this weapon is actually based off of, there's not really a good consensus. What the game says it is it's an AK-112, which is very weird that, like, presumably this is an American assault rifle and that it's an AK. That's a little bit odd. There is actually AK-12s in the real world, but they don't really look the same way as the Fallout assault rifle does. It's a bit different, and I guess technically you could say that it uses 5mm rounds. If you want to say 5.45 is 5mm, which it kind of is, and you could also say 5.56 is 5mm rounds. So either one of those could be what this is going for. The assault rifle is actually fairly solid in Fallout 1, though, even though it would kind of get outcompeted by some other weapons. Even at the time you were getting it, like the sniper rifle and the combat shotgun, it was still an okay enough weapon. The assault rifle would make another appearance into Fallout 2, and it would actually keep the same stats. This wasn't really that uncommon between Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. A lot of the same weapons made the same appearances and kind of filled the same role. The assault rifle, once again, was actually quite good in Fallout 2 because you got it a little bit more early on than you did in Fallout 1, where in Fallout 1 you were probably getting it towards the halfway point. Fallout 2 you were probably getting it to about the first third, well, towards the end of the first third of the game, and it was actually pretty good. It still did 8 to 16 damage, still held 24 rounds, still used the 5mm round, and still had pretty good range. It still could be fired in semi-auto or in burst fire, and it was actually pretty good in both of those. Mostly because of the different enemy types you were fighting and the different ammos that it could take. This weapon also could get upgraded in Fallout 2, where it could get an extended magazine, which you would think an extended magazine for an assault rifle that held like 24 rounds would probably take it up to like 36 rounds or something like that, you know, something normal. No, it went up to 100 rounds, and the model barely looks any different. The magazine looks like it's increased slightly. I don't know where all of those extra rounds are actually going in the gun, but this did make it better for burst fire and for sustained fire, so upgrading it wasn't necessarily a bad option. This is also when we got more assault rifles added, although those ones are a bit different, and they will be covered in a later video talking about all of the assault rifles in the game. Fallout Tactics is where things get a little bit different, because Fallout Tactics has the most real guns, and there's multiple different types of assault rifles in that game. The first assault rifle that you would get access to is something like the AK-47, and even though the assault rifle said it was an AK model, it doesn't really look like an AK-47. It looks kind of like a mix between that and like an M16 and an FAL, which all three actually show up into Fallout Tactics. Now, for the sake of compromising here, I'll just say that the assault rifle is probably going to be based off of the M16, since this is supposed to be an American-made gun. Given the Fallout timeline, we know that pretty much everything up to pretty much the Cold War should happen the same way in the Fallout timeline as in our own timeline. So it would make sense that things like the FAL, the AK, and the M16 all fit in the Fallout world, because they would all be date accurate as to when they actually came out, and it would make the most sense that the US would still have something like the M16. So in Fallout Tactics, the M16A1, you could actually get fairly early on, and it was actually a very solid assault rifle. This was probably the very first assault rifle that you were going to be getting that uses the 5.56 round, as there wasn't really any others that you would be getting this early on. You could still find the M16 later on into the game too. Sometimes the robots carried it, sometimes the Reavers carry it, and it was actually a pretty good gun by the time you find it. This one did 10 to 22 damage if you were firing it in semi-auto, or 9 to 20 damage if you were firing it in burst fire, and it fired out 8 rounds, the same as the other assault rifle. That's also kind of the reason why I'm considering this one to be sort of the same. This one held 24 rounds, which wouldn't be too weird for an M16, although usually 30 round magazines are the default, but I guess you could have a 24 round magazine, and I don't see why it wouldn't be different in the Fallout universe if maybe they didn't want to have quite as long a magazine. I don't know, just a thought there. This gun didn't have too much strength requirements, and it actually had very long range. It still didn't have the same effective range as like the hunting rifle, where that one got bonus accuracy at longer ranges, but the M16 could match it if you had high perception, and could actually even exceed it slightly. So it was actually a really solid weapon, especially in the early game, and it could still be really good in the mid game when you're fighting super mutants, even up to the Reavers if you had somebody that didn't have high strength that could wield something like the M249 saw. The M16 was actually pretty solid, and the M16A1 is accurately based off of an M16A1. Like I said, Tactics has like the most real weapons in it out of any of the Fallout games besides maybe New Vegas. The assault rifle would be changed once again into Fallout 3, where this time we would get something that resembles something more close to the original assault rifle from Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. This assault rifle would be called the R91, at least in game. The actual assault rifle that this one is based off of is the G3. Although the G3 had a bunch of different variants to it, the G3 would be actually chambered in 308, whereas the one in game would be chambered in 556, which would not actually be inaccurate. There were plenty of versions of this weapon that were chambered in a whole bunch of different rounds, and 556 would be another very common round. This assault rifle in Fallout 3 was a very common one that you would find, and it was a decent enough assault rifle, where this one did 8 damage, 64 damage per second. It didn't have the best accuracy, it had pretty good durability though, held 24 rounds. There was also multiple variants of the assault rifle as well that were added in the Pit DLC, where you had 2 of them, the Infiltrator and the Perforator. Both these guns are a little bit strange, at least in my opinion, because they're the same assault rifle, but they've had a suppressor added to them, a scope added to them, and then have had the stock chopped off, which is really weird to chop the stock off of a gun that has a scope on it. Now, you could argue that something like 556 doesn't have very much kick to it, and you would still be able to actually like hold it pretty still. I've also heard arguments that it makes a little bit more sense in the pit, that at least between like the tunnels and stuff that have been kind of talked about in the pit, you don't really see any besides the one you go to there, that it would make sense to cut down your rifle and make it actually quite a bit shorter. And in Fallout, there may not actually be great ways of doing that, to actually finding like a smaller version of an assault rifle. So actually chopping the stock off could make more sense there, but it would still be a little bit weird to have the scope on it as well. Unless I guess you wanted to have something that was kind of CQC, but also you could use it at range. So yeah, very interesting. The Infiltrator actually did less damage than the regular assault rifle, but it does look a bit cooler, and it was already a fairly rare weapon to find in the pit. The Perforator was the best version of this, where it had a slower rate of fire but more damage and better accuracy, but it was the second to last reward that you actually got from finding all the steel ingots. You needed to find 90 of them in the steel yard to actually get this as a reward. And overall, the Perforator was actually pretty good. The assault rifle was okay too, especially for most of it. The main problem with this weapon is that it didn't really do all that much damage, and there was still the Chinese assault rifle that did more damage per shot and more damage per second than the assault rifles did, but something like the Perforator could at least still have longer range. Either way, all of those rifles were a little bit awkward to recommend anyway for Fallout 3. They were still pretty good, but they weren't really the strongest weapons in the game, mostly because shotguns were just so much stronger than basically everything else. And now we move on to New Vegas, where the assault rifle would change once again, because there's actually multiple guns in this that you could consider an assault rifle. The one I'm going to be considering, though, is the assault carbine. This one makes kind of the most sense in my mind, as it kind of fills that role the best, and it still kind of functions similar to the older assault rifles in the Fallout games. This one had very low strength requirements, only requiring 3 strength and 75 guns, which was pretty good. Did very low damage, but very high damage per second, and actually didn't have too much spread for a fully automatic weapon. It also wasn't very heavy. The main problem for you that you might run into with the assault carbine is just simply finding one, as they're very rare. There are a couple locations, like at the Boomer's place, that you can get them for free. Otherwise, you may have to buy this, and you probably want to, since there is kind of the better version if you buy it. This one, once again, used the 5mm round, and the 5mm round in Fallout New Vegas is a whole lot better than it had been in the previous games, because this one already came with passive armor penetration on it, and could get even more if you put in like armor piercing. Armor piercing rounds usually ignored 15 armor on other weapons. On the 5mm round, it would ignore 25 armor, which is basically ignoring everything's armor besides like the very heaviest of armors. The assault carbine in New Vegas would be modeled after the Colt Model 733, which is based off of the AR platform, which makes sense. It would get stronger if you got the Gunrunner's Arsenal version of the assault carbine, because then you could add mods to it. There was no unique versions of this. This was about the closest that you could get, but the different modifications you could add would be things like an extended magazine, taking it from 24 rounds to 30 rounds, which it seems a lot more reasonable than like the 24 rounds all the way up to 100 rounds like we had in Fallout 2. The forged receiver, which would give it more durability, which is fantastic because this thing can break fairly quick, and the lighter bolt, which gave it a faster rate of fire by 20%, giving you more DPS. And then we move on to the Fallout 4 assault rifle, where this one is probably the most cursed of the assault rifles, even though sort of the assault rifle has been weird throughout the world of Fallout. The assault rifle in Fallout 4 would become this kind of abomination, which this is a very, very weird design. I have heard some rumors of why this might actually be in the game. One of the thoughts was that maybe this was actually meant for a Wolfenstein game, and then it didn't get like added, so they just put it into Fallout 4 as the assault rifle. Now, originally, even in the game itself, it was supposed to be pretty much the light machine gun, which it does fit a whole lot better than something like an assault rifle, because the gun that it's based off of, or the guns that it's based off of, is actually a couple of them. This is sort of based off of a Lewis gun and sort of a Maxim gun, and sort of like one or two other guns kind of thrown in there too. It is kind of a mess because of all the stuff we see. Now, it has the big barrel jacket like on a Maxim gun. This was on the Maxim gun so that you could actually add water to it, so it could be a water-cooled gun, and you could shoot it basically indefinitely as long as you had water going, and so long as the gun still functioned. It likely would not overheat at any point. But it also has air fins, similar to something like the Lewis gun, which had this so that it could kind of suck in more air as it fired, and it would cool down the gun that way. But it's kind of mixing up both of these to some effect. I'm not sure what. And then the whole profile of the gun is very strange, since you have something like a side-loading magazine, which neither the Maxim gun nor the Lewis gun really had. The Maxim gun was generally belt-fed, and the Lewis gun had the very iconic pan magazine that you would put on top of it. You do get a side-loading magazine, which was on some Maxim guns. Throughout the years, the Maxim gun lasted a very long time and still kind of does to this day. So the drum mag is a little bit more accurate to it, but everything about this gun is just very strange. It does use the 5.56 round for some reason, even though a gun this big, I don't know why it would. You might as well just load it with something bigger. You might as well load it with 308 or something. And kind of worst of all in Fallout 4 is the assault rifle is actually good in terms of overall stats, where it does actually do pretty good damage per second. It has long range. Its sights, even its iron sights, are actually fairly decent. They're not hard to use at all. But this gun is just extremely ugly to look at, and there's just something odd about it. Also, I feel like if this gun is accurate to how heavy it's supposed to be and shooting 5.56, it should have basically no recoil, and it still kind of has recoil in the game. It realistically shouldn't have any recoil whatsoever. Now, there is no unique version of the assault rifle in Fallout 4, although you can find unique versions if you get any sort of legendary drop from legendary enemies, which can be pretty strong if you find like a bleed one or exploding one or anything that's really strong in full auto or in semi-auto. Like, the assault rifle is surprisingly good, and I don't really like that about the weapon because it's really not one of my favorite weapons in Fallout 4. Why they decided to take a pretty normal looking assault rifle in all of the other Fallout games, yes, the models did change quite a bit and there are some shenanigans going on with it, but at least all the assault rifles in the older games look like they could function or are actually based off of real guns, so they should function just fine. The Fallout 4 one looks like it could function, yeah, but it's so weird and detached from it that I don't know why it's like this, especially since Fallout 3 takes place not too far from Fallout 4 and not very many years before Fallout 4. So why they swapped from something like the R91, the G3 rifle, to this assault rifle, I have no idea. It is very weird. This is the history of the assault rifle in the Fallout universe. We will be talking about all of the assault rifles in the Fallout universe because there is quite a lot of them. And yeah, that should be pretty interesting. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.